Welcome, Game Chasers everywhere, to episode 30 of The Collecting Confidant with your host, GunstarHero. And I'm back this week with a racing game. Yes, the first time I get to talk about one of my favorite genres. And this week is a doozy because we're going to be talking about an arcade racer with a very revolutionary control scheme, which I feel is going to really shake things up in the genre. This week, we're talking about Inertial Drift Twilight Rivals Edition, which is now available physically for the PS5 via major retailers. And this actually came out on September the 29th of 2022. Even though, if you've been paying attention to the game and the trailers and the news outlets covering this game, the actual official release date is not until October 20th of 2022. So why am I holding this game in my hands, might you ask? Well, we'll get into that shortly. But first of all, I want to talk about why this game is special, and especially if you're an arcade racing enthusiast, especially a fan of 90s arcade racers like Ridge Racer, this is going to be your cup of tea. And again, something that is probably going to blow your mind in terms of how it flips the arcade racing genre on its head. Firstly, before we get into the background of the game and the physical retail copies, let's talk about the game itself and why it's special. So, Inertial Drift originally came out in September of 2020 on the PS4, the Switch, PC, and the Xbox One, and with the Twilight Rivals Edition is now coming over to the Xbox Series X and the PS5. But let's talk about the base game itself and some of the enhancements with the DLC that is dropping on October 20th if you already own some of the last gen versions. This game, like I said, is an arcade racer inspired by old games like Ridge Racer, but with a twist because this relies on a twin stick drifting mechanic, which I've never seen until this point, and the developer, Michael O'Kane, part of Level 91 Entertainment, confirms that this is the first time this is being done where, yes, like any traditional racing game, you will control your car with the left stick, but the right stick will now allow you to control the angle of your drift. So something completely revolutionary, mind-blowing, and deeper than it sounds. So if you've ever played other games where drifting is a major function, I'm thinking, for example, like Hot Shots Racing, or even, say, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, typically in those games, as the developer Michael O'Kane explained, when you drift, you'll typically be doing it on rails or with some kind of computer assist to make you seem like you're controlling the drift, but in reality, most of it's being controlled for you automatically. Whereas with Inertial Drift, you now have complete control over the angle of your drift, and in conjunction with how you use your brake and your accelerator, you can see how this can get very deep, and it definitely lends credence to that old adage of being easy to learn and hard to master, because the developers wanted this to be easy enough for anybody to pick up and play so that even your grandmother could get into this game at, say, the easiest levels. But for the truly hardcore arcade racing enthusiasts, there is so much challenge to this game, and it can get brutal at the highest level. So I definitely will warn you that it will demand your best. And fortunately, there is a way of navigating the various game modes to truly get the most out of this experience. And I feel now that I've had quite a bit of time with the game, so I have a fairly good understanding of what the game offers, where it's going, and also what I'd like to see in some future updates, which I'll get into. So firstly, let's start with the story mode, which is the star of the show here. The story mode essentially has 4 different characters that are all different friends that all practice together. So you're going to follow Edward, Ada, Iba, and Viv based on the different difficulty level you want to go through. So essentially there's going to be 3 different types of classes of cars. You're going to have your sport class, which is broken into easy and intermediate modes. Then you're going to have your performance class, which is the hard mode in this game. And then finally the expert level, which will be the racing class. And then each of the 4 characters represents one of those 4 difficulty levels. Now, when you play through the campaign, you're going to go through 5 different tracks with a few different races each, and as you progress through each race, you're going to be reading the dialogue and learning a bit more about how to handle that particular car on that particular difficulty level. Because this is where the game gets very complex. The base game of Inertial Drift itself has 16 different cars spread over 20 different tracks, and each of these cars, like the game describes, are fiercely unique. Each one has its own different skill set, its own way of being handled, and whatever you think you learned with one car can almost be washed away when you go to learn the next car. So this game's constantly keeping you on your toes and forcing your brain to retrain itself in terms of how you've learned this game. And I'm going to be honest, to newcomers to this game, especially for people who've never tried this whole twin stick drifting mechanic, you're gonna find it a little intimidating at first until you get used to it. And then you're gonna notice that the game is kind of brutally hard once you first start it, which can be, again, a little intimidating and might force the odd person to give up early. But I will say, stick to it. Keep practicing, because eventually you will learn. The more you play this, you'll get into a groove and something will just kind of pop off in your head at some point where you'll just suddenly find yourself in a flow, being able to master these courses, but it's going to take some time. Fortunately, the story mode is going to give you the tips and tricks of how to proceed. And another cool thing about it is that when you encounter different rivals and different tracks, once you at least finish the race, you don't always necessarily have to get a gold medal, thankfully, to just proceed in the campaign. You will unlock their cars. And we'll get more into what you do with those later on. So you've got these different campaigns to help teach you the game. And then on top of that, with the Twilight Rivals DLC, it's going to add 4 more additional campaigns as per the difficulty levels, which will allow you to unlock 4 more additional cars and play on 4 more additional tracks. There's tons of content and lots of replayability here, lots to sink your teeth into and keep you playing for years to come. Now, that's the story mode. So that's going to teach you the basic mechanics of the campaign. The whole point, if you're paying attention to the actual story in the story mode, is that all these friends are preparing for this Summer Grand Prix Challenge, which is another one of the modes in this game that you can go and play and try to best once you've gone through the story mode. And this will definitely help you in terms of your training ground. Now, there is still a lot of stuff to unlock through the campaign mode. And then what's also cool about that is that any of those cars that you unlock in the campaign mode, there's also an additional challenge mode in the options menu where you can go try out those cars, and if you finish the challenge, you'll be able to unlock those cars for use in the arcade, the multiplayer, and the Grand Prix mode. So again, lots of reasons to keep you coming back for more. On top of that, you have online and split screen multiplayer modes. The split screen is as it is, it's a vertical split screen, works pretty well. But then the online itself, unfortunately on the PS5 retail version I'm playing, didn't work. I tried all 3 different racing classes, waited in each of the lobbies for quite a few minutes, wasn't able to get a ping. So it's either a case of maybe there's not enough people playing this game yet, or because it's pre-release, not a lot of people know it, or it could just be the fact that I'm thinking that this version I bought here, it's version 1 and there's no updates. So I'm thinking that it's just a pre-release. And I actually, to that effect, did speak to the developer, Michael O'Kane. I actually emailed him and he got back to me and cleared up the confusion, because I was wondering, why am I reading everywhere that this game's coming out on October 20th and yet I'm still holding on my hand? Like, well, what's going on here? And he told me, well, unfortunately, the physical version was published on the date it was, but the game itself had to get delayed a little bit to put some finishing touches. So the official release date is still October the 20th, but if you did buy this version now, you're basically getting an early glimpse into what the final product's going to look like. Mind you, there is an upcoming update coming up before the official release date, which is supposed to potentially address some of the issues in the game. Number 1, I noticed that when I'm earning trophies that they're not actually populating into my collection, so I'm hoping that will be addressed with the patch. Number 2, I know that from the forums that people who are playing this on Steam and other platforms were able to access leaderboards. Those are not present as of yet in the PS5 version. But again, knowing that it existed in the past, I would expect that would be included going forward. Also, in terms of some stuff that I would like to see in the patch, I noticed that with the PS5 and the Xbox versions, the reason why this is a bit different than the last versions is because this will also have 4K support and support for up to 120 frames per second. When I was trying the 120 frames per second mode, I noticed that the game crashed over and over and over in the middle of races, whereas when I disabled the feature, I found the stability to be a lot more. Michael O'Kane, I did mention this to him as well. He said that he wasn't coming up with any of these issues during playtesting, but that he'd be looking into it because, again, this might just be a PS5 related issue, and I definitely can confirm that my TV does support HDMI 2.1, so it's probably not an issue on my side, but something that could be rectified with a patch later down the road. So essentially, in a nutshell, that's the game. You can see that there's a lot of content here and a lot to start with, especially from a two-person team. So I want to talk a little bit now about the history of the game's development and how it came to be. So this game, it was about 7 years development. The lead designer and creator Michael O'Kane worked on this on the side as he was attending Queen's University in Belfast, and he was, working on other different projects, would work on this in his off hours, and then during a placement for university, he actually met his co-creator, Tom Matthews, through a work placement, and Tom will be the one that's responsible for the graphical style, which is very 90s, very retro, and very cool, and inspired directly by the old 90s anime Initial D. And of course, right there in the name of the game, Inertial Drift, you can see it's a play on Initial D, so you can definitely see the original inspiration there in terms of the neon colors, the cel-shaded graphics, and it even goes as far as to include an Initial D-inspired animated movie that plays when you first launch the game. So I thought that was a cool little touch, and again, goes in line with what O'Kane intended when he said, I want this to be an homage to 90s arcade racers, but with a twist. But also in terms of inspirations for the game itself, like I said, was inspired by 90s arcade racers, and O'Kane admitted that his favorite racer from back in the day was Ridge Racer Type 4 on the PS1, and if you ever did play the old Ridge Racer games on the PlayStation, back in those games, they were just fast, frenetic, played very loosely with physics, had pulsing soundtracks, blistering graphics, and were just really simple, fun, fast racers. But now with this, you're taking that concept and adding the drift mechanic, which just really puts it over the top. Finally, in terms of gameplay inspirations, he said that another major influence on using the twin stick design was EA's Skate game for the 360 and the PS3, in terms of how Skate back in the day took a very popular genre that was, popularized by the Tony Hawk games, but then turned it on its head by giving the player even more control over the mechanics by clever uses of the analog sticks. And you can see that again in Inertial Drift, where we're so used to a certain way of drifting in games. I would even say that Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is one of those games where they truly tried to give you some depth of control over the drift, but even then, doesn't even come close to what Inertial Drift is able to do with the right analog stick. I truly feel that this is such a revolutionary mechanic that all other future arcade racers had better take note, because I will say, I did try to go back and play some other arcade racing games after playing this. I tried Hot Shot Racing, I played a little bit of Mario Kart, and it just doesn't feel the same anymore. Now that I've had a chance to play with this right analog stick, it's going to be incredibly hard to unbreak that train and to go back. So I would definitely like to see more of this in the future. I found it interesting that O'Kane mentioned that one day he wouldn't mind trying to make a Wipeout game. Michael, if you're listening, my ask of you is that you go to Bandai Namco, show them what you've done on Inertial Drift, and say, let's do another Ridge Racer with a bigger budget and a bigger team. I would love to see something like that with the twin stick drift controls. That would just blow my mind completely. So that's Inertial Drift. Again, the official release is coming out on October 20th, 2022, when the patch for the previous gen versions will drop. So the Twilight Rivals patch will drop for the PS4, Switch, Xbox One, and Windows. And then the Twilight Rivals Edition with the 4K support and 120 frames a second will come out officially for the PS5 and Xbox Series X and S digitally. And apparently, there's also a physical version coming out for the Xbox soon, but there's no date. But in the meantime, if you want the physical version on the PS5, you can go to major retailers now and get it for about $30 US. But if you are looking for the PS4 or Switch editions, the PS4 edition goes anywhere from about $16 US if you want to get the import copy to about $30 US for the North American copy. but then the Switch version, like is typical, is a bit harder to find. The Switch version seems to be out of print, is now on eBay, so if you want it on that platform, you may have to pay a little bit more. Hopefully, the Twilight Rivals DLC will be free, but I'm not quite sure as to what's going to happen with that yet. But regardless, something to look forward to for racing enthusiasts, especially arcade racing enthusiasts. This is a love letter to those old games, but something so unique and innovative that it's just going to flip you on your head, force you to rethink the way you've looked at arcade racers, and just give you endless hours of fun, hopefully with a few improvements coming down the line, especially in terms of trophy support, high scores and leaderboards, but I'm pretty confident it's all going to happen. So definitely I have to commend Level 91 Entertainment and PQube for a job well done, and I'm fascinated to see what these guys are going to be doing in the future. You've been watching episode 30th of The Collecting Confidant with your host GunstarHero. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one. Later, Game Chasers, and peace.